What's up YouTube, Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another quick video here for you. I'm going to show you how to change your front brake pads and your front brake rotors on a 2018 Honda Pilot. Now the first thing I like to do is push these caliper pistons back inside the caliper, which is going to make room for the new thicker pad material and of course the thicker rotors. What we're doing is essentially pushing the brake fluid that's in here back up this line and into the master cylinder. Now before we do that, I like to take a look at the master cylinder and make sure that there's enough room in there so that when we push this fluid up, it's not going to overflow and make a big mess. So let's go take a look at that real quick. All right, so here's our master cylinder. You can see that there's still quite a bit of space in there so that as we push the caliper pistons back in and the fluid comes back up into this reservoir, it's not going to overflow and spill out this lid. Now, a lot of people ask me if you need to take the lid off in order to do that. You really don't. I don't really feel much of a difference in the compression of this air. I think that air is actually able to escape out the lid. Also, because the brake fluid is hygroscopic, meaning that it attracts moisture, even the moisture in the air, that can cause it to degrade and go bad. It lowers its boiling point, and that's not good. So I'll usually just leave that lid on and just make sure that we have room. Looks like we're good to go, so let's go back down and push those caliper pistons back in. Now there's lots of ways to push these caliper pistons back in. I like to grab a little stout screwdriver, or in this case I'm going to use these Mayhew Dominator demo drivers. It's like a screwdriver Prybar hybrid. Now all we're doing is just trying to catch on either the edge of the rotor or in front of the pads and then pull that slowly towards you. Now what I'm going to do is kind of push it back over and shift in between the pad and the rotor right there. And let's go ahead and do two at once. Just slow and steady pressure, pull this towards you, and that will push the caliper piston back in. That looks good right there. You see how we've got a lot more room in there now? All right, now we can loosen and remove the two caliper slide pins, and those are a 17mm socket. I'm just going to use the Milwaukee mid-torque and see if that'll zip these out. All right, now we can pull the caliper off, and you see this right here is a little caliper hook. It comes in handy for hanging this caliper. We just don't want to let this drop or dangle from the brake line. So I'm just going to put that in there and pick this up, and I'm going to hang it up high on the coil spring. Now you see these little V springs are trying to push our pads out onto the ground. I'm just kind of holding them. We can just pop these springs out. We can pop out the old brake pads. Just take note that the position of the squealer or the noisemaker on this one was at the top on the inside. All right, now I'm going to take out the larger caliper bracket bolts. Those are a 19mm socket. I'm going to try the same mid-torque, see if that will take these out. Now those are stuck on there pretty good, so I'm going to use the heavier duty or the high torque Milwaukee here with the 19mm socket. Let's see if that'll take this off. When I take off the other bolt, I like to have one hand holding this bracket so that it doesn't drop to the ground. There we go. Now, in order to get the rotor off, just take note with Honda and Acura, they use these rotor screws that hold them on, and they're very notorious for stripping out. So I would recommend you get something like this. This is an impact screwdriver, and it turns slightly every time you hit the back of it. So we're just going to hit that with a little sledgehammer while holding that steady and see if we can get that to break free. All right, we got it. And look at that, the rotor's just coming right off, which is great. Now, if your rotor doesn't fall off like this or come right off, you'll see right here we have two threaded holes in the face of the rotor. Those are there so that you can get two bolts. I believe they're M8 by 1.25. And as you thread those in, they'll basically act like a force screw, like on a press, and they'll press up against the hub and push the rotor off. Or you can always just hit it with the Rotor Remover 9000. It's also called a Tanya Harding. That will also usually take this off. Ours just came right off, so we got lucky. Now, before I put the new rotor on, I'm gonna clean the surface here of this hub with the little wire wheel on a drill, and we'll put some anti-seize on there so that the next person that does the brakes will be able to get that off. Just remember to wear some safety glasses if you're gonna use something like this. That looks good. Now I'm just going to put some of this copper anti-seize on here from Permatex. That will prevent that new rotor from getting stuck. All right, that looks good. Now these new rotors are packed in oil from the factory so that they don't rust while sitting on the shelf. So it's important that we get some brake cleaner and wipe that surface off to make sure that the oil doesn't mess up our new pads. Now there's some debate as to whether or not it's important to put these screws back in that hold the rotor in place. I usually do put them back in because if anything it just helps hold the rotor on. Just need to make sure that you line up this little tapered area with the threaded hole on the hub. You know, most people say that these are really only there for manufacturing to hold the rotors on as this vehicle goes down the assembly line, but it doesn't bother me to put them back on. As long as they're not stripped or you didn't have to drill it out, I usually just put them right back in. All right, now we're going to get this bracket cleaned up and we're going to change out the hardware and clean and re-grease our slide pins before we put this back on. Pretty simple just to pop off the old hardware, but before you do, I like to take note to the orientation. You see this clip has a little tab. This is the one that as it sits on the vehicle is at the top, and then this one does not have that tab. So let's just remember that when we put it back together. But we'll just pop off the old clips here. Now I'm going to use the wire wheel to clean up these little recesses where those clips go so that we don't end up with any rust or corrosion building up, which will cause that clip to lift and cause your brakes to bind. I'm going to use a different wire wheel on the brush here this time, but make sure you always wear your safety glasses if you're using something like this. Okay, that looks nice and clean. Now what I like to do before putting these clips on is brush just a little bit of this synthetic caliper grease where that clip goes. Not so much as a lubricant, but more of a protectant to prevent that from corroding or rusting and causing that to lift those clips. So just kind of smear that around on the inside, just like that. Now our kit did come with replacement hardware, so just remember which one goes where and go ahead and line that up and press it in place, just like that. And then same with this one here. This is the top one with this little tab. Line that up and it should just snap right into place like that. There we go. Now here I will also put just a little bit of the grease in these little slides where the pads sit. Some people say you shouldn't put any in there, but I like the idea of just that little thin coating. You know, I know it might just attract dust and it might just melt right off, but even if it just has just a little bit of protective layer there, that will help the pads slide and move freely inside this little bracket or inside this little abutment clip. But that looks good. So now we can pull out these slide pins and we're going to clean and re-grease them. Pull them out one at a time. This top one here is the one with the rubber bushing. I'm just going to wipe that off. Sometimes I'll put them back in once or twice just to see if I can get a little bit more grease out. That also gives me an opportunity to kind of test this rubber bushing. Now, I guess from Honda, they're going to tell you that you need to replace this every time, and you can if you'd like, that's fine. I didn't end up getting them, so we're going to reuse this. As long as it's not tight or bound up in there, it'll be fine. But you see how it has this little cutout? That's to prevent the trapped air from causing this to push out or bind. And I have in the past, when these do get old and swell, I'll just take a little razor blade and slice that just a little bit deeper. Seems to work just fine, but in our case it's not swollen, so we're just going to reuse it. The one I'm using here, I'm just about out. It's this caliper grease from Versachem. Had to cut the lid there to get down to the very bottom. Guess I need to order some new grease, unless they want to send me some. Now, if these are really stuck or bound up, you can pull off these boots and clean those recesses with a brush and with some brake cleaner. In this case, it really wasn't stuck at all. Just wiped out the old grease, and we're just going to pop this one in with the new grease. As you push it back in, see how it's pushing out a little bit? So we need to push it, squeeze on that boot to burp any air out, and then it should look just like that. See, now it's not pushing out farther than it should. Just make sure that it moves nice and smooth in there, and that one feels great. So let's do this one here. Hold the boot with one finger and pull that out. This one does not have the rubber bushing. Just wipe off the old grease. Put it in again, get some more of that old grease out of there if you need to. Again, these ones are really clean and that grease wasn't sticky or anything, so that's good. And then just kind of guide that in. If you kind of twist it as you push it in, that will help spread the grease around on the inside. And then just push it in till that boot pops right back onto the pin, and then give it a squeeze to burp out the air. That looks good. Now this bracket is ready to go back on. Now before I put that bracket on, I like to take a look at the bolts here that held the bracket on and clean them up a little bit and put some thread locker on there. I'm just going to use this Permatex medium strength. So I'll just do a little bit on each one. Just kind of spread that thread locker around like that, and those are ready to go. So we'll just hold that bracket up where it was and get these started. All right, the torque spec on these is 101 foot-pounds. All right, and then we can put in our new brake pads. I just picked these up from O'Reilly. These are the Brake Best Select, and you can see that these are labeled as outer and inner. This, of course, is the outside pad. We're gonna put this one in first. Just kind of get it started here at a little bit of an angle, and it should just press right on. That feels good. You don't want those to be bound too tight that they can't move, but these ones feel just fine. All right, and then here's the inside pad. You can see it says right here, inner, and it also says right hand. So it's letting you know that this is the passenger side. We took a look at the old pads and we saw that the little squealer or noisemaker here was at the top on the inside, and that does match what our aftermarket pads are telling us to do. So that's what we'll do. We'll just pop this one in now. There it is. Now here I just noticed on our caliper, it's kind of gunked up here, kind of dirty on the boots. So I'm just gonna grab this wire brush and carefully try to clean some of that dust and gunk off. Just carefully brush those boots off. Just a lot of road grime and gunk on there. Now I also noticed that these pistons are not all the way pushed back in. So I think what I'm gonna do is grab an old pad, and I'm gonna use the old caliper compression tool here that I've got and try to push those in the rest of the way, because I just don't want to struggle with fitting these over those new pads. That might fit, but I'd rather just make sure. So I'm just gonna put that old pad in there and turn this, push the piston the rest of the way in. That looks good. Let's drop it down here, do the other side. Okay, now there's no question that that will fit over the new pads. And that's all nice and clean. Sometimes the rubber boots don't push all the way in, or they'll have a little bit of trapped air. You can pull them out just a little bit with a pick or a little hook tool, and you'll feel that little air escape. But these look good. They're nice and flush, and this is ready to go back on. So what I'm gonna do is take off the hook like that and have it sitting, just carefully balance it right up here so that it's easier for me to grab without worrying about that hook. All right, now what we need to do is put these V-springs on before we put the caliper on, but that's gonna push our pads out and they're just gonna fall right onto the floor if you're not careful. So here's where it's a little bit tricky, but you just wanna use one hand to squeeze the pads together while you put these V-springs in. They just go into these little holes in the edge of the pads, and you're gonna have to hold your hand kind of snug, squeezing those together when you put these in. Just go ahead and line that up. That looks good. Now I'm gonna use my other hand and just bring this down and carefully slide that over the pads. Just be careful that you don't knock the backing plates off the pads. Oh, no, before I do that, I like to do something else. I forgot. Now, I forgot to put on some of this stuff right here, this silicone ceramic extreme. I'm still holding the pads in, but I forgot to put this on, so I'm gonna try to do that while I'm holding the pads. Now, it doesn't take much of this stuff, but it really helps to cut down on some of the noise and vibration that happen with brakes. I almost forgot that step. You know, and sometimes this gets on your gloves and your hands as you're moving this around because you have to hold those pads together, but I think this will work just fine. And then we just put this on, just like that. Now, sometimes you do have to pull in a little bit on the slide pins to get them to line up. But you can see that there's also a flat spot on the slide pin, and that's what prevents this from spinning as you tighten it. But we can go ahead and put these in and get those started by hand. Sometimes you do have to pull up a little bit on the caliper to line those up. Now the torque spec for these caliper slide pin bolts is 37 foot-pounds. And you're done. Now, it's very important before you go driving off, you need to go back in the vehicle and step on the brake pedal halfway several times until it feels firm. Now, when you do that, just make sure you don't press the brake pedal all the way to the floor, because if you do, that can damage the seals in your master cylinder. And what that's going to do is push these caliper pistons back out, pressing those pads up against the rotor where they need to be. And don't forget to double check the fluid level in your master cylinder as well, and make sure everything's topped off where it needs to be. I hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. And of course, I'll get a link in the description where you can pick up all of the parts and tools using the video as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.